you know? And so baptism is very much like this. You know, it's, why is it, is baptism a cure for sickness we don't have? Or is it something real? You know what I mean? Is this something that we're passing out to make ourselves feel better, that it's really not doing anything? Or is there something legit behind it? And, you know, the easiest way to start the conversation, I think, is, well, if there is a God, and God does create things, then let's see what that God says about things. And, you know, the Bible tells us that man in the Old Testament is trying to build a relationship with God. And this is a Catholic view, and so it's not really like the literal interpretation of the Bible. But what happens is the Hebrews are looking around at what everybody else is doing, and I think it makes so much sense. Let's go away from the Hebrews and move to maybe Mexico with the Incans or the Mayans. And let's say it's 5000 BC, and it rains and they get fruit, and they eat their fruit, and they go, yeah, it's wonderful. Well, then it stops raining. And they go, how do we get it to rain? And so they say, well, when I want something from you, we trade, or I steal it, or, you know, these sort of things. So I bet whoever's up there needs something. And every single region in the world sacrificed. And so what these people would do is they would say, maybe the gods want watermelon. And so how do you get something from down here to up there? Well, you burn it, and it turns to smoke, and it goes up there. And, you know, I mean, how many years would it take for them to realize that maybe it wasn't the watermelon? But so, I mean, you know, you just take that sequence of events. So it's not raining, they burn a watermelon and it rains, and they go, ha! He loves watermelon! And so for the next maybe 100 years, they burn watermelons until a real drought comes, and then they go, he doesn't like watermelon anymore. We got to offer something else. And it goes step by step by step until you end up with, I don't know if it's every region, but at least every continent, other than Antarctica, of course, had human sacrifices. So they all got to the point where they were saying, we need something from the thing that's in control, and we're going to give them a human. And the Hebrews at the same time lived in this entire culture where everybody was doing this type of thing. And so they're saying, we also need a relationship with God, and the way this works, God, is we give sacrifices to you. And so what God does is he comes down to their level. You know, so I think one of the important ways to think about it is the sacrificial system is not God's idea. That's kind of man's idea of, when I want something from you, I give something to you, and you give me back something. That must be the way he works. You know, Blaise Pascal said, God created man in his image, and man has been returning the favor ever since. So now we create God in our image. And when we think the only way we're going to take something from somebody is if they give us something, that's the way we imposed on God. And God's concept behind the whole thing is, I don't need anything. There's nothing you can give me that will make me any better. But God does want something for man. God created man to be godlike, and man wasn't doing that. But when God initially gave the commandments, the idea is, here's the commandments, now abide by them. And what the Hebrews should have said was, oh dear, we can't do that. We don't have the power to. We need help if we're going to do that. And I mean, being a mom, you know what it's like. I mean, when your child's like, I mean, you know, it starts at 1. Mine, myself. You know, I mean, and as a parent, there's always this dilemma of, should I just take it from them so that they don't spill it, or should I let them learn a lesson? And when the child starts to say, can you do it for me, or help, they're finally starting to learn. Well, in salvation history or the Old Testament, what the early church fathers called it was patrology, which is God is like a father to humanity. And just like you are like a mother or father to your child, and you wait for your child to say, can you please help? This is what God did with man. And in the New Testament, Jesus said, God didn't give us the commandments so that we could be proud of ourselves for obeying them, but to show us that we couldn't. And so the concept is that God did come down to the Jews, and he did say, obey these commandments for the sake that they would say, Daddy, we can't, and you need to help us. But you know what they said instead? They said, thank you, this is wonderful, and we will obey them, and if we don't obey them, you can kill us. And that was man's arrogance and pride. And so God comes down, makes this deal, and man went too far promising what he couldn't keep. And, you know, on the one hand, just like the mom going, well, I hope you spill it, there's a certain side to God that's saying, well, here we go, you know? And so the rest of salvation history in the Old Testament is man finally coming to terms with he can't do it. And so their idea was that once the whole world would be under like Jewish rule, and then the Jews would spread the commandments of God all over the whole world, then everything would be perfect. Almost more like a mentality of when they're fixed, everything will be fixed. And God at the same time is going, it's not about them, I want you to be fixed. And the same thing he does to us still today. You know, one of the easiest things to do is to say, the world will be better when they fix their problems. And what God wants us to do is say, I need help with my problems. And that's what God wanted the Jews to do. He wanted to say, I need help with my problems, God. I can't keep them. And so when they first started sinning, God gives them the sacrificial system. And one of the things that Jesus says is, God did not want the sacrificial system because there's nothing that you could give him. But he gave it to you so that you could come to terms with how much you needed his help. You know what I mean? And then one of the coolest things I think about is St. Thomas says it this way. He says, there's no better way for God's justice and his mercy to exist than for God to become man and take on that punishment from man's arrogance. So God got to be 100% justice by killing man when he said that he would do what he couldn't do. But he got to be 100% merciful by being himself who became a man. Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
And you know, the thing is that how do you apply that to us? And you know, I guess Jesus could have said, or God could have said, let's make them do 1,000 jumping jacks for 5 years. Or, you know, but God made water, and then he made that water to be our means of salvation, and water's everywhere. And it is all he asked is that you put water on your head and say these words. And you know, it's one of those things that's like, that's it. But if God is the creator, I mean, this is one of the ways I like to look at it too, is because God is the creator of water and the institutor of baptism, we can knowingly say God created water for baptism. Isn't it lovely? And I printed off the rite for baptism, because in the rite for baptism, they say things. There's a whole list of things about water. It says, in the beginning, God created the firmament of the heavens and the firmament of the water, and he separated them. And then it goes through the flood. And one of the things, like God destroyed the evil men in the world with water, so is God going to wash away the sins from your past covenants with the water of baptism. I mean, it's just beautiful. And when you see it through those eyes that God is doing this and he had the plan in his mind the whole time, it's just amazing. And now, but one of the important parts is that God, the sacrificial system wasn't God's idea, it was man's idea. So the satisfaction of that covenant where man said, I know I can keep these commandments, and if I can't, kill me. Something needs to be done there. So Jesus does die and say, now you can apply my death to that bad promise through baptism. And the covenants from the past are gone with that. But that's not what God's intention was. God's intention was for man to be godlike. And so there's two parts to salvation for Catholics. Is you apply Jesus' death and resurrection through baptism, and then you receive the grace and the sacraments afterwards. And through receiving the grace and the sacraments afterwards, now you're brought up to godlike. And that's what God wanted the whole time. You know? And I like connecting that with what is real, because it's what happened in every culture across the world. You know, it's like there's somebody that's in control more than me, and he's like us. And the one thing that God's saying is, I'm not like you. And I think this is the coolest thing almost ever, is all of those people were putting things on that sacrifice to be raised up so that God, and hoping that he would like it. And do you know what God does? He comes down and crawls onto the sacrificial table and says, kill me, and how about you eat me? Isn't that amazing? And they thought God was hungry. And God came down and said, no, you're the one that needs to eat. And the story is divine. And and it's real. It's not rooted in something a man conjured up. It's so real that you can look across the globe and you see sacrificial systems everywhere. And the coolest thing is that God is the opposite of man, not like man. So when man's wanting to exchange and take and give and take and give, God's saying, I just give. And that's hard for you to understand. And then, and then that's what he wants us to be, is just the people that give and we don't take. And that's so hard. And it's still one of those things that we still need help for. And that's one of the greatest things in going to Mass, is we should be able to go to Mass and say, I'm here because I can't do it on my own. And so that's just kind of like the way I like to do the baptism concept, because that's what it is. It's based in reality and our own need for help. And then another thing that I like to talk about with this is a lot of Catholic philosophy follows Aristotle. And Aristotle taught that a child is a tabula rasa, or a blank slate. And one of the things that we kind of like to think is our children are their own person. And there's some truth to that. But they are also a product of their environment. And so if we could use the explanation, like, I want my child to choose their own language. So I'm not going to force them to speak English. And when I'm around them, I'm not going to say dada, because I think that's wrong. They may want to say papa from Spanish instead of dada. And then I'm just going to see what happens. Well, they're going to speak English. That's a stupid idea, because it takes this concept of you're raising a child in a vacuum that's separate from you, and it's just not real. And so what baptism, the reason we do child baptism is because that is a part of a sacramental history, the baptism is. And it's the door into salvation. And the rest of that is done by the parent. So what you're doing, what the parent or even godparent is doing, is passing on that faith to that child. And it's not as explicit and on purpose as it is on accident and because that's who you are. And so your child's going to speak English because you speak English. Your child's going to be an alcoholic because you're an alcoholic. Your child's going to, you know what I mean? And that's the way, and so that's really at the core of what it is to get your child baptized. Is it saying, our child's entering into this life and we are promising to build that sort of life so they continue into it. And in the rite, they say, do you reject Satan? Yes. Do you remember this part of the rite? And you go through, yes, I will do that. Yes, I will do that. And it's so reasonable, and it makes so much sense that that's how the whole thing works. Almost like, if we could take somebody and say, you're going to raise your child to speak English. Make that decision right now. Okay, yes. Okay, you promise that you won't mess with them and do 5 different languages when you're telling them, yes, I promise I won't do that.
Right.
Well then, in 10 years, you should probably have a pretty good English speaker. Well, in 10 years, you should probably have a pretty good Catholic. Someone that's on their way to learning who God is. And I will give you this lovely handout. It's from Peter Kraft on how to raise Catholic kids. And one of his first things is, in order to raise Catholic kids, you know what you got to do? You got to be Catholic yourself. And that's just the most important part. And I think that comes back to that whole linguistic thing, If you want to raise English speakers, then speak English. And then and being a dad myself, I know how hard it is in our times where we're all so busy. And, you have to, set aside real places and time to do things. Because if you don't, you're not going to find time. And, our faith, you have to make it. And I like a space too. At my house there's this little alcove in our house, and I have a prayer closet there. And we have all the candles in there, and we don't get to it every day, but probably 75% of the days, I go pray, and then my kids and wife join me, and we do a prayer together. And it's like that space and that time. It's at the same time every day that we do it, and it's like we know that it needs to be done. And one of the wonderful things about kids, and especially autistic kids actually, is, I don't have an autistic kid, but just in general, the rituals and what's the word I'm looking for? The routine. They thrive on routine. And so it's all you have to do in so many ways in order for your kid to speak Catholic is put the routines in there. As soon as you wake up, we're going to do this. As soon as this happens, we're going to do this. And to where it just becomes a part of their routine, a part of their life. And then they're speaking English, not because you decided that you're going to teach it to them, but because it became a part of their life. You know what I mean? And that's just one of the things I love about Catholicism is it's physical. You want confession, you want forgiveness of your sins, well, walk over to the church and say it to the priest, and the priest is going to say, by the power given to me by the church, I absolve you of your sin. I mean, it's a real space and time. And I think that's one of the places that we mess up so much, is we try to make our spiritual lives aside from time. If we really had the idea, it would be, if somebody was to ever ask me if I was religious, I'd put the check there. But if they were to watch my life, they might not ever see it. You know what I mean? And it's like, but we have to put it in our life for it to really be a part of who we are. And so that's always one of the things I like to close with is, make sure that it's in there. You can't escape it. Don't let it just be an ideal. And in our society where politics has taken precedence over religion and stuff, it's like, you vote once a year. It's really easy, I think, to have that separation. It's like the most important thing you do is something that takes 15 seconds. But your faith should be something that you're doing every day and has an impact on every part of your day. And that's so much more thorough. If anybody should be arguing about things, we should be arguing about religion, not politics. But they are certainly connected, so that's why. But anyway, and then on the back of this, I have some things that I think are important. On the part that says extra help, and that is to live liturgically, which is, find a place and time, and to live simply. I am indebted to my parents for teaching me to live simply. My dad ran a gas station, and had so many people coming in there borrowing money from him, and they were just borrowing money from all kinds of different people. And it was just a conversation that was in my house all the time. Don't get in debt so that you're a slave. And young people that I know, they get in debt so fast and so quick that it feels like there's no way out, and it's like their life ends up being a burden of some sort, and then the kids end up, it's just it's a mess. And so that's one of the things I like to tell parents: don't let yourself become a slave to your credit. Give expectations. Be explicit about your expectations. Parent intentionally. If you don't parent intentionally, you'll end up just being just like your mom and dad usually, is the way it works. And we all know that our moms and dads weren't perfect parents, and because nobody's a perfect parent. But you can take those, you can imitate your parents by accident and then add intentional goodness to it. You know what I mean? And it's I like to think of God as saving the world generation at a time. It's so rare for someone to go from bad to good overnight. I mean, it can happen, but it doesn't happen very often. What usually happens is generational goodness comes. So, if every child says, I had a good mom and I'm going to be like her, but I'm going to do this and add it to it, then the generations by generations will become more good. And then my last two, I did the last one already, but the second to last one is plan for screen time. Media time, protecting them in the cyber world. And I've taught high school since 2005, so 14 years I've been teaching high school, and I've asked almost every year the young boys how many of the kids that they know, and this is 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, are addicted to pornography. And I've never had one student, I have one student say 70%, and other than that I've never had anybody say less than 85. And I was listening to a talk a couple months ago, and the guy had 700,000 teenagers in attendance all over the world. They were using screens in different places, and they asked the kids to give questions. The overwhelming majority of the questions were, how do I stop looking at pornography, and why should I not kill myself? And the guy doing the talk, he said, but they're fundamentally connected. When you look at other human beings as a use for pleasure, then you start to mirror that back on yourself, as though you're worthless except for pleasure. And we know that at the end of that version of pleasure, there's guilt and not satisfaction. And those two problems culminate into suicide and the feeling of no self-worth and value, and it makes sense that they do. And kids are being more and more experienced with it at a younger and younger age. And just on a psychological brain or neuroscience level, it's terrible. And so, it's something my wife and I and my brothers and sister-in-laws, we're trying to tackle theoretically before our kids are old enough, and it's difficult. It's not an easy answer. Just with kids playing with the cell phone. My 3-year-old picks up my cell phone, and she likes to ask Siri things. Well, all she's got to do is mispronounce something, and up comes something that she just didn't mean to get. And how do you control that? It's a difficult thing to control, but I almost think there should be parenting, and there are groups, like to help each other out. We're a part of a couple different Facebook groups on what do you do with technology with your children? And my sister has all these things with her daughter. She has a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. And so she can mirror their screen all the time and things like that. But it's scary. It's a scary world to live in because of the technological stuff and social media. And so I don't have answers to that part. But I do think almost like we could say it's like the Hebrews. They ask for help. I don't think any parent's going to be able to tackle that one alone. And to work together with other parents, and it's something that we need to do. and pray and really ask for the Holy Spirit's guidance. So put yourselves back into the Hebrews role and say, our world is so complex and difficult. I'm not going to be able to figure it out. Can you please give me the assistance I need to help my child not want to commit suicide? I mean, but I mean, in so many ways it is like that. So, I don't know. I have a 14-year-old. How do you do? How's the 14-year-old?
She's really good.
She's good? Oh, good.
Yeah, so. But she definitely uses the technology.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of trying to stay on top of it. It's just that they know so much more about it than what we do.
Yeah, that's one of the things.
That's what I do.
Yeah, my sister is saying that, like, if there was an app that people were using a month ago that the parents got wind of, well, they've already gone through 2 or 3 more by the time it's. And when I first started working at St. Anne's, I had the confirmation class, and I said, I think something like, now if you guys, what do you do on Facebook? They all like giggle, and I just had, it's like, and then nobody was on Facebook because they don't use Facebook. And it was like, oh, I'm really that behind. And it's tricky. I don't know what you do with that.
I know, 'cause my daughter will say, well, that's your age.
Yeah.
She uses Facebook. We don't use Facebook.
Yeah, and then, I mean, it's really interesting. And, it's one of those, I battle in my own mind with, should I throw my Facebook account away? But we use it for work a lot. But I'm just scrolling through the news feed sometimes, and I see somebody that said something to me 5 years, and just like there's stuff that comes up, and I mean, I think my news feed right now has like 15 people on it, so that I just don't ever see the other, and it's just more freeing, and it's all like religious stuff. It's like, and it, it is a version of, I guess, like a meditation for the day, and that type of thing. But I definitely understand how it can be problematic,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, that's what I like to end on somewhat, just so it's like we do know that we're fighting a pretty decent battle with those things. And I can post that to media.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And